Section 9 of Imperialism and World Politics, Part 3 of 4, by Parker Thomas Moon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Alistair. Chapter 16b. The Policy of the United States Toward Latin America, Part 2. Subsection Puerto Rico. The smaller island of Puerto Rico was annexed outright at the close of the Spanish War. This was pure imperialism. After a transition period of administration by the military authorities, a civil government was established under the Foraker Act, passed by the United States Congress. Though a House of Delegates elected by the people was established, the controlling power was vested in a Governor-General and an Executive Council of officials appointed by the President of the United States, with the advice and consent of the United States Senate. This system was liberalized by the Jones Act of 1917, which granted American citizenship to the inhabitants of Puerto Rico and created an elective Senate, but still government was far from autonomous, and Puerto Ricans complained of their condition. On the other hand, there could be no question that as regards sanitation, education, and economic production, sugar, tobacco, coffee, fruit, etc., American rule was highly beneficial. The death rate was reduced from 26 to 18.7 per thousand. Some 2,500 schools were established, nor could there be any doubt that the increased commerce of Puerto Rico was almost wholly with the United States. Puerto Rican exports increased from $10 million in 1900 to $88.25 million in 1924. Puerto Rican imports from $10 million to $89.33 million. The share of the United States in the island's exports rose from 34% in 1900 to 91% in 1924, while the percentage of the island's imports supplied by the United States grew from 70% in 1900 to 90% in 1924. This was partly due to the tariff arrangement whereby exports from the United States are admitted to Puerto Rico and vice versa, free of duty, whereas foreign goods are subject to the duties prescribed in the United States tariff. Trade figures show that the island means many millions of dollars worth of business to the American iron and steel industry, the cotton manufacturers and soap makers, as well as to American importers of sugar and tobacco. If occasionally there were complaints that labourers in Puerto Rico were underpaid and overworked, or that the American administration was solicitous chiefly for American interests, these were but jarring minor notes in the major cadence of prosperity. Subsection Canal Construction and Dollar Diplomacy in Central America. After the Spanish-American War, the pressure of the United States was felt in Central America. Central America consisted of 5 small republics: Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, besides a very small British colony of British Honduras and the Isthmus of Panama, then part of the adjoining South American Republic of Colombia. In parts of Central America, American fruit interests had acquired considerable economic importance. There were also British railway interests and German-owned plantations. Not economics, however, but strategy was the dominating factor in the situation. For decades, various plans had been discussed for the construction of a ship canal through Nicaragua, or through the Isthmus of Panama, to afford commerce a shortcut from the Atlantic to the Pacific. There was a question, however, whether such a canal ought to be American, or neutral, or international. Back in the year 1850, the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty between the United States and England had provided that any such canal must be unfortified, neutral, under international guarantee. Such restrictions were repugnant to the exuberant national spirit which prevailed immediately after the Spanish-American War, and from England, then preoccupied with the Boer War, permission was obtained by the Hay-Pornsfoot Treaty of 1901 to construct a canal under American control, to be policed by the United States on condition that such a canal should be open to the merchant vessels and warships of all nations, in war and in peace, without discrimination or inequality of tolls. It would have been relatively easy to obtain from Nicaragua the right to dig a canal across Nicaraguan territory, and this route was favoured by a commission of investigation, but President Roosevelt and the Senate, for various technical reasons, preferred the route across Panama. Roosevelt obtained from Congress authority to use this route if he could make the arrangements within a reasonable time and at a reasonable expense. There were two difficulties. One was the concession which a French company, headed by the great canal builder Ferdinand de Lesseps, had obtained from Colombia in 1878 to construct a canal across Panama, a concession which remained valid, though the projected canal had never been built. This obstacle was overcome easily by an offer of $40 million to the company which held the de Lesseps concession. Philippe Bunau-Varilla, an engineer interested in this company, had exerted himself to win American approval for the Panama route, and so Thayer claims a New York lawyer connected with the company had contributed $60,000 to the Republican campaign fund and won sympathetic influence of Mark Hanna. The other obstacle, Colombia, seemed to be nicely disposed of when Secretary Hay signed the Hay-Heron Treaty of January 22, 1903, with the Colombian minister, providing for a 99-year lease, in imitation of the Chinese leases of 1898, of a strip of territory 6 miles wide across the isthmus, for a payment of $10 million plus an annual rent of $250,000. Great was the chagrin in Washington when the Colombian Senate, hoping apparently to make better financial terms, refused to ratify the treaty and adjourned on October 31, 1903. Roosevelt decided to go ahead with the canal regardless of Colombia's rights. He drafted a message to Congress in October 1903, recommending that the United States should build the canal through Panama, even without Colombia's consent. In a private letter to Dr. Albert Shaw, he wrote on October 10, 1903, "I should be delighted if Panama were an independent state, or if it made itself so at this moment, but for me to say so publicly would amount to an instigation of a revolt, and therefore I cannot say it." He did not need to say it. Mr. Philippe Bunau-Varilla and various Panamans in the United States and in Panama felt sufficiently confident that their action would not meet with disapproval to launch a revolution in Panama on November 3, 1903. American Marines were forthwith landed under orders to prevent the landing of Colombian troops within 50 miles of Panama. The right of secession denied by Lincoln to the southern states was recognized by Roosevelt in the Colombian state of Panama. Why the new Republic of Panama was so zealously shielded and immediately recognized by the United States appeared clearly enough when a treaty was signed on November 18, 1903, whereby in consideration of $10 million cash and $250,000 per annum thereafter, beginning in 1911, Panama leased to the United States in perpetuity a canal zone 10 miles wide over which the United States would exercise sovereign rights, including the right of fortification. There is, on page 426, a map titled The Lands of the Caribbean Sea. Thus Roosevelt, in his own words, took the canal zone. The gigantic enterprise of digging the canal was begun soon afterwards, and the canal was opened to traffic on August 15, 1914, but its completion and formal opening did not occur until July 12, 1920. Up to that date it had cost the people of the United States $366,650,000 for construction, not including the large expenditures for fortifications, or the $40 million paid for the concession, or the $10 million paid to Panama, or the $25 million subsequently paid to Colombia. The net cost up to 1924 was $453,266,139, of which almost three-quarters was paid out of the Treasury, the remainder being provided by the sale of bonds. The net receipts, after operating expenses are deducted, have not yet risen to the point where they will pay 5% interest on the investment. Yet the canal was unquestionably worth building. It brought San Francisco 7,873 miles nearer to New York by water. It brought Peru 6,000 miles closer, Valparaiso, Chile, almost 4,000, and Japan 3,000 miles closer to New York. It was a factor in increasing the trade of the United States with Japan from 129 to to $559 million a year. It handled slightly greater tonnage than the Suez Canal in 1924. It was a boon to the commerce of the world, and chiefly to American commerce. On the other hand, it must be admitted, American railways suffered, because much of their former transcontinental business now went by the water route. Economic interests are rarely in national harmony. The advantage gained by the United States in undertaking the construction of the canal single-handedly, instead of allowing it to be an international enterprise, was not commercial. By the terms of the Hay-Pauncefoot Treaty, foreign ships enjoy the same rights and pay the same tolls as American vessels, and when Congress in 1912 attempted to exempt American coastwise shipping from all tolls, Britain protested, with the result that the tolls exemption law was repealed in June 1914, at President Wilson's insistent and high-minded demand. The advantage, let it be repeated, was not commercial, but strategic. The United States could and did fortify the canal, so that in case of war it could be defended against attack, and so that it constituted virtually another naval base on the Caribbean Sea. This naval acquisition, however, inspired American naval experts with an earnest desire for additional naval outposts in the Caribbean to protect the canal. The canal, built to protect the United States, now had to be protected by further acquisitions, notably Fonseca Bay, the Corn Islands, the Danish West Indies, Haiti, and Santo Domingo. But of these more will have to be said. The digging of the canal meant that Central America must become very definitely an American sphere of interest, as European imperialists would say. Certainly no other great power could be allowed to gain a foothold near the canal. At any rate, no foothold nearer than the existing British possessions, British Honduras, Jamaica, etc. Increasingly, the United States overshadowed the Central American republics. Panama, though independent, was a protégé, if not a protectorate, of the United States. From the beginning, her existence had depended on American protection. The canal zone, occupied by American military and naval forces, was in the middle of the republic. Europeans would call Panama a veiled protectorate. Immediately north of Panama lies Costa Rica, better governed than its neighbours, probably because it has a larger percentage of cultured white inhabitants and a smaller number of illiterate half-castes and Negroes. In Costa Rica, the mines, banks, commerce, and railways were controlled largely by foreigners, and the United Fruit Company's banana plantations were of great importance. Oil interests, however, were more decisive. In 1915 and 1916, Americans obtained extensive oil exploration rights, when in 1917, a revolutionary government headed by Federico Tinoco seized power and seemed disposed to grant oil concessions to the cadre British interests. President Wilson refused recognition, even though Costa Rica joined in the war against Germany. Still, recognition was withheld, and Costa Rica was excluded from the peace conference. The attitude of the United States encouraged a successful rebellion against Tinoco in 1919. One needs hardly add the new government headed by President Acosta, unless prejudiced in favour of British oil interests, was soon recognised. Presently it was reported that the British concessions were cancelled. Costa Rica is independent, but her government must respect the new Monroe Doctrine, the doctrine that the United States has a veto on concessions. Nicaragua, next to the north, came more definitely under American domination. President José Santos Zelaya unwisely opposed American interests. When in 1909 a rebel movement, friendly to American interests, was set on foot with American backing, Zelaya committed the supreme act of imprudence by executing 2 Americans for attempting to dynamite a troopship. Thereupon, Secretary Knox severed diplomatic relations with Zelaya's government, and Zelaya was soon ousted. Now Knox's plans could be carried out. Thomas C. Dawson, who had previously been concerned in establishing the American receivership for the Dominican Republic, and who had served as American minister to Panama, was sent to Nicaragua to arrange the re-establishment of a constitutional government, a settlement of American claims, and a loan from American bankers. In consultation on board an American warship with the leaders who had overthrown Zelaya, Dawson made what has been called the Dawson Pact, 1910, including provision for a loan guaranteed by customs receipts, and for the election of General Juan Estrada as president. But Estrada soon found the task of governing an indignant people too much for him, and Adolfo Diaz, formerly a bookkeeper in American employ, was given the presidency in 1911 and maintained in office against the wishes of the population by the presence of a small force of American Marines at Managua and the occasional appearance of American warships off the coast. With him, Knox was able to make a convention, June 6, 1911, for a loan of $15 million to Nicaragua, guaranteed by Nicaraguan customs receipts. Though the US Senate refused to ratify this treaty, other loan contracts were put through from time to time. An American was appointed to control the collection of Nicaraguan customs revenues, and the Nicaraguan railways were pledged to American bankers. Years later, William Jennings Bryan revived the dollar diplomacy of Knox and negotiated the Bryan-Chamorro Treaty of 1915, whereby, in return for $3 million to be expended under American direction, Nicaragua submitted to American financial control, granted the United States exclusive rights to build an interoceanic canal, this to forestall possible competition with Panama, and gave the United States a 99-year lease of the Corn Islands and the right to have a naval base on the Gulf of Fonseca. Nicaragua thus became another ward of the United States. Nicaragua's customs revenues were collected under American supervision. A commission of 1 Nicaraguan and 2 Americans was appointed to supervise Nicaragua's expenditures. American bankers, notably Brown Brothers, and J.W. Seligman, virtually controlled the country's finances, banking and railways, and American Marines prevented, or aided in suppressing, insurrections against this agreeable state of affairs. When Nicaragua's neighbours protested that the naval provisions of this treaty infringed their boundary rights, and when the Central American Court of Justice, which the United States had helped to establish in 1907, decided that this protest was just, the United States ignored the decision and thereby delivered a mortal blow to the court. Criticism of American policy in Nicaragua was probably responsible for the decision of the United States government to withdraw its Marines in August 1925, as a proof that the United States was not endeavouring to dominate the little republic. Moreover, a new electoral law drafted by American experts was adopted by Nicaragua, and the American experts were invited to supervise the elections. Naval domination thus gave place to expert advice, but it requires little imagination to predict that should any Nicaraguan government attempt to cancel American financial and naval privileges, the Marines would again do their duty at Managua. Honduras, a land of cattle ranches owned by Hondurans, mines owned by American and British corporations, and banana plantations owned by Americans, has a relatively large Indian, Negro, and half-breed population, and a small white upper class. Such ingredients produce political instability, revolutions, dictatorships, and filibustering. Civil war between rival political factions afforded the occasion for the landing of American Marines in 1924, and American intervention succeeded in restoring order. Salvador, the smallest of the Central American republics but densely populated, prosperous and fertile, remained independent until 1922, its commerce being conducted largely by English, Dutch, and German exporters, its coffee crops increasing, its government fairly stable. In 1922, Salvador made a loan contract with Minor C. Keith, head of the United Fruit Company, for the issue of bonds amounting to a maximum of $21,500,000. Part of the issue consisted of 6% bonds to cancel an old English loan. Another part consisted of 8% bonds sold to New York bankers at 88% of their face value and redeemable at 105% of their face value. And a third part, 7% bonds. The significant feature of the contract was the provision that 70% of the Republic's customs revenues were pledged to pay interest and sinking fund charges on this loan. The 70% was to be paid directly to a bank named by Mr. Keith. In the case of default, this bank was to transmit, through the United States Department of State, the names of two persons, one of whom would be selected by Salvador to act as Collector General of the entire customs revenue. Disputes regarding the contract were to be referred through the Washington State Department to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. The inference drawn by the bankers was, "It is simply not thinkable that after a federal judge has decided any question or dispute between the bondholders and the Salvador government, that the United States government will not take the necessary steps to sustain such decision. There is precedent in a dispute between Costa Rica and Panama, in which a warship was sent to carry out the verdict of the arbitrators." Salvador, in short, becomes a financial dependency of American bankers acting with the corporation of the United States government. In Guatemala, the most northerly of the 6 republics, the United Fruit Company grows bananas, and there are considerable American railway interests. Over Guatemala, the United States did not establish control, however, perhaps because the country was farthest removed from the canal, perhaps because the administration was friendly to foreign capital and to the United States. Guatemala, for instance, offered the United States the use of its waters, ports and railways in the war against Germany in 1917-18. In general, it may be said that since the Panama Revolution, American bankers have been rapidly acquiring control of Central American railways and other enterprises, and in cooperation with the Department of State, have been extending control over the finances of Central American governments. This is dollar diplomacy. It has been carried on by the Democrats and Republicans alike. It has been supported by Marines, warships, and what we might call naval diplomacy. It has made Central America a sphere of interest of the United States, in which European intervention would be resented, in which concessions to any European capitalists may not be made without danger of offending the watchful eye of the Department of State, in which American naval and economic interests hold undisputed supremacy. The iron hand is usually covered with a velvet glove, as may best be illustrated by the Central American Conference of 1923. The Washington State Department considered it desirable to have the armies of the Central American republics reduced, and a court of arbitration established to prevent petty wars in Central America. The court, which had been established in 1908, it will be recalled, had expired in 1918, after the Fonseca Gulf case. A new court would have to be created. Moreover, there was a strong movement in Central America toward federal union, and Washington was apparently desirous of having a hand in any such federation. Accordingly, in 1922, the presidents of Nicaragua, Honduras, and Salvador were invited to talk matters over on board the U.S. cruiser Tacoma, and there a preliminary understanding was reached, with the result that the United States next invited delegates of the 5 republics, not including Panama, to confer in Washington, with Secretary Hughes as their host. That the affairs of Central America should be settled in distant Washington, instead of at home, seemed not to occur to Mr. Hughes. Under his tactful guidance, the conference agreed on an arbitration court, armies were limited, a free trade convention was signed, and various other unifying measures were adopted. The United States presided over Central American affairs, and presided with a hand which could be gentle, though firm. Subsection: Intervention in Haiti and Santo Domingo. It is time to turn back to the Caribbean islands as President Roosevelt turned, after he had established his foothold in Central America by taking the Canal Zone in 1903. Most of the smaller islands in the West Indies, as every American knows, are colonial possessions of England and France. Denmark had St. Thomas, and Holland owned Curaçao. The 4 largest islands are Cuba, Haiti, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. What happened to Cuba and Puerto Rico we have seen. Jamaica was British. Haiti, however, was independent. On the island of Haiti there are 2 republics, the western third of the island being the Republic of Haiti, a Negro state with a cultured French-speaking upper class, and the eastern 2/3 being the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, a Spanish-speaking mulatto state. In both republics, the long arm of the United States has been felt. Roosevelt's attention was attracted to the Dominican Republic in 1904 by the fact that the government was unstable and bankrupt. The only feasible method of protecting the European owners of Haitian bonds against loss seemed to be the seizure of the Haitian customs houses and collection of the customs revenue for the benefit of the bondholders. Germany, as the most interested European party, was reported to be on the point of taking such action. So were France and Italy. Roosevelt, of course, would not permit this encroachment on the American sphere of interest. Moreover, the Dominican government requested American aid. Roosevelt did not desire to annex the country.
"I have about the same desire to annex it,"
he said,
"as a gorged boa constrictor might have to swallow a porcupine wrong end too."
But he was willing to do police work. A plan was agreed upon whereby Americans would collect the customs and turn 55% of the revenue over to foreign creditors. This plan was put into operation quietly and immediately by executive order, though the United States Senate did not ratify a treaty sanctioning the arrangement until 1907. Santo Domingo was now a financial protectorate, a bankrupt in the hands of an efficient American receivership. The Western Republic, Haiti, meanwhile, continued independent until 1915. In the summer of that year, the American public, or as much of it as reads the foreign news dispatches, was shocked to learn that President Villebrun Guillaume Sam of Haiti had caused 200 political prisoners to be butchered in cold blood, and that he himself had taken refuge in the French consulate, only to be dragged out and beheaded by an irate mob. That American Marines should thereupon have been landed to restore order seemed natural enough. Subsequently, however, it appeared that more than a year before this bloody drama, the United States had unsuccessfully demanded the signature of a treaty giving the United States charge of the customs collection and debt service, as in Santo Domingo, and that the United States Navy Department had dispatched the Washington to Haiti in January 1915. It also appeared that a strong reason for this forehanded action was to prevent Germany from obtaining a naval base in Haiti. It was the French, however, rather than the Germans, who landed Marines in June 1915, to be followed by United States Marines in July. All this seems to have occurred before the massacre of July 26th and the beheading of July 27th, 1915. After the events of July 26 through 27, more American Marines were landed, and Rear Admiral Capitan took charge of the customs houses and administration against the protest of the Haitian Congress. The treaty, which had been rejected by Haiti before the occupation, could now be put through with ease and dispatch. A president who would accept the desired treaty was elected in August 1915, and the treaty was signed on September 16th. The United States, so this interesting document stipulated, would aid Haiti in developing her agricultural, mineral, and commercial resources. The United States would also name a general receiver and financial advisor to hold Haiti's purse strings and see that the bankers owning Haitian bonds got their due. Haiti would make no new loans or changes in her tariff without obtaining consent from the White House, nor would Haiti lease or cede territory to any foreign power. And finally, not only would the United States organize an armed constabulary to establish order in Haiti, but also American forces would intervene whenever necessary in the future to preserve individual liberty, life, and property. This meant a protectorate, if there ever was one. As there was inevitably some popular opposition in Haiti to this signing away of the Republic's independence, it was not thought expedient to permit elections until 1922. American Marines still remained in the island, and the elections went off well enough, resulting in the election of a president who promised to cooperate loyally with the United States, and still the Marines remained. While the occupation continued, American business interests were actively carrying out the treaty pledge to aid in developing Haitian resources. New York banking interests purchased control of the Banque Nationale de la République de Haïti. American capitalists bought up land, sugar, mills, railways, lighting plants, and other property. Moreover, the American naval authorities were active in promoting sanitation and road building. The natives might not enjoy being compelled to work on the roads under the supervision of American engineers, but Americans felt that the end justified the means. Let the Haitians protest as they would, American newspapers such as the New York Times were joyfully certain that
The Americans are in Haiti to raise its people from a state of ignorance and savagery for which their rulers were responsible.
An official American report insisted that the occupation was characterized by
freedom from all suggestion of selfish aims.
The United States, in short, was assuming a small share of the white man's burden. The Haitian Treaty of 1915 so pleased the State Department that an early opportunity was sought to force a similar arrangement on the Dominican Republic, since the new plan afforded so much wider scope for American control than was allowed by the Dominican Treaty of 1907. The opportunity was afforded by a revolution in the spring of 1916. American Marines were landed, and recognition was refused to the new Dominican president unless he signed a treaty on the Haitian model. With more patriotism than prudence, he refused, with the result that in November the American commander of the forces of occupation assumed control of the administration of the Republic. Year after year the occupation continued, while American bankers increased their interests, and American Marines performed the task of policing the country and promoting sanitary and material progress, much as in Haiti. In 1920, the Wilson administration announced its intention to withdraw the Marines from Santo Domingo, but Wilson was followed by Harding, and Harding by Coolidge, and the Marines remained. Not until the summer of 1924 were the American Marines withdrawn, and then only on condition that all the acts of the American military administration establishing revenues, authorizing expenditures, or creating rights in favor of third persons be ratified by the Dominican government. Furthermore, the Treaty of 1907 was replaced by a treaty signed in December 1924, which provided for the collection and control of Dominican revenues by an American receiver and his staff. Until the loans of 1908, 1918, and 1922, and new loans up to a maximum, including the balance of the old loans, of $25 million shall be completely paid. The Dominican Republic may be added to the list of Caribbean financial dependencies of the United States. The International Banking Corporation, National City Bank of New York, with 7 branches in Santo Domingo, has
almost complete control over the financial life of the country.
And it is estimated that a third of the Dominican sugar industry is owned by American capital. One other extension of American control in the Caribbean islands merits brief mention, namely the purchase in 1916 of the Danish West Indies for $25 million. These islands, now known as the Virgin Islands of the United States, were of negligible economic importance. They were acquired solely for strategic reasons, in accordance with the 20th century policy of the United States, the acquisition, so far as possible, of all important naval bases in the Caribbean region. End of Section 9.